What's up, everybody? Chris here, and I just left the theater. Just got home from seeing Avengers Endgame. Caught an early morning showing of it. Had some time this morning to check it out, and it was a really interesting theater going experience. Typically you would think, going early in the morning is a good time to go because you can sort of get there and relax, and it's not like an evening showing, especially the night of something being released, which was the case last night with the movie. But it was packed. I was surprised. Well, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but it was kind of surprising to me how that sort of turned out. But it was a full house, a full theater, and people were really engaged with the experience as it played out. So before I get into the details of the movie, I'm just going to say up front, spoilers. I feel like I can't really talk about the movie adequately without spoiling some things. So if you haven't seen it, I would say step away now and go see it, and then come back and leave some comments about what you think of the movie. And if you enjoyed the review, if you enjoyed the video, like the video, subscribe to the channel. More of this content is coming as quickly as I can do that. But every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I try to put out a new video, either a video game review or commentary piece, a movie review, or something along those lines. So just up front, what did I think about the movie? And I guess I should say too, a little context. I think it's important to have context when you're getting someone's opinion about something. So I really enjoyed Infinity War, but I didn't necessarily love it to pieces like I do some Marvel movies. Part of that for me was hampered by the way the movie ended, in that when I saw it, I remember everybody was talking about, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe the ending. You're not going to believe what they do. Without spoiling it, people told me it was just going to be sort of a tearjerker ending. And I watched it in the theater, and I really enjoyed the movie. But when it got to the end, I just didn't buy it. I mean, I just didn't get why people were getting so emotionally invested in it, knowing that a lot of these people, more than likely, these characters were going to be resurrected somehow in the next movie. So to me, it was just kind of a cliffhanger movie that was an entertaining Marvel offering, but I didn't love it. But I was kind of interested, of course, to see what was going to happen with Endgame, because that's where the meat and potatoes of where the story ultimately was going. And so going into the movie, for me to really enjoy it, I thought, they're going to have to do something that has some lasting stakes to it. They're going to have to have, there's going to need to be some humor, because I like that about a lot of the Marvel movies. That's sort of my taste. I like the original Avengers. Thor Ragnarok, just to put this out there in context, is probably my favorite Marvel movie, even after having seen Endgame. The first Guardians of the Galaxy is up there as well, and Doctor Strange is too. So I really, really liked Endgame a lot. I think it is better than Infinity War, but it's not my favorite Marvel movie. I don't want to necessarily assign a score to it, but I would say it's very good, it's great, but it's not perfect. There are a few issues with it that I had. A lot of that had to do with pacing, I think, a little bit, and it had to do with a plot point that was central to the entire movie, but was talked about very briefly and kind of quickly, and I don't think explored quite as deeply as it could have been. So getting into spoilers. So if you saw Infinity War, you know that at the end of that, Thanos has all Infinity Stones, snaps his fingers, and wipes out 50% of all life in the universe, because his suggestion is that life is taking over, it's out of control, it needs to be put in check. And so he's really doing the universe a favor, because it means more resources for everybody around, right? Even though, if he has this godlike power, as some people have suggested, why not snap your fingers and make more food and planets and things for people? I don't know. But anyway, that was his reasoning in Infinity War. And so it ends with a lot of the mainline Marvel characters being just wiped out. Black Panther's gone. Star-Lord is gone, Chris Pratt's character. Spider-Man is gone, Tom Holland. So it's a pretty devastating ending, and of course it built up a lot of hype leading to Endgame. So again, going into it, I wanted to see something permanent happen, some stakes happen, and that did occur, which is a good thing. So in terms of the plot, of course, it picks up not long after Infinity War. I think they say 23 days or something like that. And the remaining Avengers, which includes Thor, Captain America, Black Widow, and a handful of others, and Thor's off doing kind of his own thing, which is a humorous point of the movie. But it picks up 23 days after that. Well, at that point, he's not actually. I digress a little bit. But they pick up 23 days later. they manage to track down Thanos on the planet he's hiding out on because they see an energy surge from where he used the Infinity Stones once more, but it turns out he used them to destroy them, and so there's no way to use something like the Time Stone then to turn back time and prevent all this from happening. So they go there. It's a really bleak situation, and Thor responds by just chopping Thanos' head off within the first 15 minutes of the movie. So that's kind of an interesting start to things, the way it plays out. Then we get a time jump 5 years later, and things have become really dire. There are monuments erected to everyone that's vanished since the event. People are trying to pick up their pieces of their lives and move on, but obviously it's a really difficult thing to do, and the world basically is in shambles. And through Captain Marvel, we learned that it's not just Earth, it's all of the planets in the galaxy. Thousands of planets are really doing what they can to recover, but it's just sort of a dire straits type of situation. So Tony Stark, Iron Man, has moved on too, and now has a child with Pepper Potts, and so he's got his own life, and he's very hesitant to have anything to do with the Avengers and anything tied to that. But what really kind of kicks things into gear is Ant-Man emerges from being trapped in the quantum realm because of the way that movie ended in the post-credit scene. I think it was Ant-Man and the Wasp, where everyone vanishes, and he's in the quantum realm doing something, but so he's stuck there. So a mouse, of all things, or a rat, accidentally walks over a control panel and sort of ejects him back into reality post-Thanos, post-vanishing. And so, he has no idea what's happened. He's trying to put everything together, too, and ultimately decides that maybe there's a way to reverse all this because time acts differently when you're shrunk down to that quantum level as opposed to what happens in sort of the macro world, the macro environment. So goes to the Avengers headquarters, presents this idea, and that's what kind of kicks things into gear. So when I mentioned earlier that there was a plot point that I think they glossed over just a little too much, for me, that was actually the time travel component of this. So at one point, the characters actually kind of jokingly refer to things like Back to the Future, The Terminator, and every other well-known time travel movie. I think they even throw Hot Tub Time Machine in there as a reference. But they sort of suggest, and Bruce Banner suggests, that time travel doesn't work in the same way as it does in the movies, in that if you go back in time and change something, you can't come back to the present. I think the explanation they give lasted all of 15 seconds at that point in the movie, and it's kind of glossed over, and it all just sort of suggests that we're going to handle time travel a little bit differently than other blockbusters have, and so just be aware of that. But to me, a little more explanation regarding what exactly that meant, because it's touched on so quickly and the movie's moving along at such a rapid pace, despite the fact that it's a 3-hour feature, just made me kind of stop for a second and think, okay, wait a second, so why is it different than other movies? And so I was trying to piece that together while the plot was just sort of clipping along from that point. And it started to make more sense as things went on. And I will say, I think one of the strengths, actually, even though I can see the explanation of the time travel plot point as being a problem, one of the strengths of the movie is that it really reminded me a lot of Back to the Future 2. We are treated to revisiting a lot of the events of the previous films, especially the first Avengers film and some other things, that in a way that we haven't seen before. Because what they decide to do is if they can get all the Infinity Stones together before Thanos collects them, then they can form their own gauntlet and undo everything that he's done, right? And so I think that Back to the Future 2 component worked really well, where Captain America runs into a past version of himself and all of that sort of stuff. The directors found a really creative way to bring in old plot lines and characters and loved ones that we haven't seen in a while, or that you maybe would have a hard time imagining seeing in one feature-length movie. And it mostly works surprisingly well. It's, this movie is really sort of a culmination, as you've heard, of a decade plus of Marvel movies, and in some form or fashion they've managed to put pretty much every character from every movie in this film as best they can, with as clear of a plot line as they can. Some of it is kind of, touch on this, move to the next thing, spend a little more time on this one thing type stuff, but it really does work. And because we've been emotionally invested in these characters, as you've likely, seen and experienced as watching these movies, the success of this is that you really want to see what happens, and you feel like you have a stake in this because we, as the audience, have invested a lot of time in the proceedings over the past decade plus. So in that regard, it does work well. I will say that, when you get later in the movie, when you finally get to this ultimate battle that's going to finally take place between Thanos and the Avengers who have survived, and I'll again launch into spoiler territory and say that they do manage to collect the Infinity Stones. Hulk is the only one who can wield something similar to the gauntlet and snap his fingers because of the immense power that it releases. They do manage to resurrect everybody, and there is one big showdown at the end. But what's interesting about it is that it's with a past version of Thanos. When they travel to the past, because of Nebula's cybernetics, old Thanos, or past Thanos I should say, is able to see what's going to happen in the future and what it is that they're trying to do. So he makes a beeline for Earth, and that's where the war takes place. So the only thing I would say that stands out as another detriment to me is that the actual battle felt kind of quick. I don't have any sense, having just left the theater, of how much screen time it actually occupies, but while it was awesome, I mean, it's just sort of the ultimate nerd comic book fun thing to see all these characters on the battlefield fighting the ultimate villain. It felt like it went by in the snap of a finger, pun intended. So I thought that was a little bit too fast, and I think that they maybe could have, had that be a little bit more of a build-up. And the way it ends to me seemed a little bit quick too. But along the way, leading up to that, there are some big plot points. And I mentioned earlier that, I needed, as a viewer, for there to be some big stakes in this. And again, what I thought was going to happen, and I think what everybody else thought was going to happen, happened. All the major characters who vanished were resurrected. We do lose some big ones. One of the big ones that perishes in this movie is Black Widow. In an effort to get the Soul Stone, Hawkeye and Black Widow go to Morag, I think it is. I can't remember the name of the planet, but the planet from Infinity War where Thanos throws Gamora off to get off the cliff to get the Infinity Stone, and they sort of battle it out because neither of them wants to let the other one sacrifice him or herself. But ultimately, Black Widow dies, and of course, Hawkeye's in shambles emotionally because of this. But she dies, and in fact, later in the movie, when Tony gets his hand on the gauntlet and sort of the last ditch effort by Thanos to sort of win this thing, the Hulk at some point says when he used the gauntlet that he tried to bring her back, but it just couldn't happen because she's sort of eternally bound to that transaction that takes place to get the Soul Stone. She's gone for good, as far as I can tell from the way they present this in the movie. So that was kind of a jarring thing for me. I really didn't expect Black Widow's character to be gone. And actually, that elicited a little bit more of an emotional response from me than the other big character death, which, if you're ready for it, here it comes. Tony Stark does die at the end of the movie, wielding the gauntlet that he's able to sort of graft into his suit while fighting Thanos at the very end. He snaps his fingers to make Thanos and his armies disappear, but of course the consequence of that is that the surge of power that goes through him ultimately kills him, and so he does die at the end of the movie. So for some reason, though, when that happened, I didn't have kind of the emotional response to it that I thought I would. I just sort of looked at it and thought, okay, well, Iron Man's dead. He had to do that. And it didn't really make me overly sad, which is not to say that I don't love the character of Iron Man. It just didn't resonate with me emotionally in the way that I thought it would. Again, I thought Black Widow dying and the way that they handled that was much more poignant for whatever reason. I think because of Hawkeye's family and all that, it just sort of stood out a little more, but it was just a really great scene the way they did that. Another interesting aspect of this is that Captain America has to return the time stones after everything's finished and Thanos is dead, so that the timelines don't continue branching off because of a conversation that Bruce Banner has with the sorceress from Doctor Strange, Tilda Swinton's character. So he goes back to do that, but then he decides not to return. He stays in the past and lives out the life he always wanted to have lived. And then we see him, catch up to the future and be old man Captain America, and he kind of retires from that role. So really, in this movie, we lose Black Widow, we lose Iron Man, and we lose Captain America, even though he's not dead. He's old and retired at this point. So there were some stakes there, and it did pan out in, overall, I would say, a fairly poignant way. For whatever reason, my gut reaction to it is I like the movie a lot. It's a great movie. It's just not my favorite Marvel movie. I think in terms of being an ultimate culminating experience to all of these, it's fantastic. It works in that regard. I don't know what else they could have done to make it better. But in terms of standalone movies, I tend to gravitate gravitate towards things like Thor Ragnarok, excuse me, that I'd mentioned earlier, toward Guardians of the Galaxy, toward Doctor Strange, just because I think they're by nature a little more focused. This movie had a gargantuan task in front of it, and I think they've handled it as best they could. I do think at 3 hours, it felt at times to me a little bit long, but again, it tended to move at a pretty brisk pace, and I tended to be invested in it the whole time. So, is it worth seeing? 100%. This is the type of movie you absolutely should see on a big screen. If you have not seen the bulk of the Marvel entries leading up to this, I would maybe say spend the time doing that, because this will be in theaters for a while. Spend the time doing that before you see it. You just want to appreciate a lot of the callbacks and allusions and things that are thrown in there if you haven't seen them all. Either way, though, you absolutely should see this in a theater. It's a great movie. I may see it one more time while it's in theaters just because of the spectacle of it. But again, at 3 hours, it's definitely a time investment, but it's a worthwhile one. So yeah, that's my review of Avengers Endgame. I'll be interested to see where things go from this point forward. There is a note of finality to it, but they certainly leave it open for a myriad of other things to continue moving ahead. So I'll be interested to see what they do with that. So thanks for watching. Enjoy the weekend and enjoy Endgame if that is on your agenda, which it should be.